Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Joey Barnett, and I am joined with Charlie Oppenheim. You are listening to our EB5 Investor Outlook Chatting with Charlie series. Today is February 27th, 2024, and we've never been busier with EB5 as we are today, and I am very, very happy to speak with you today about some of the data that we're seeing with recent EB5 filings, how that impacts prospective investors who are trying to get applications in before April 1st when there are some USCIS filing fee increases. And of course, we are going to have the wonderful insight of Mr. Charlie Oppenheim, who used to work at the State Department writing the Visa Bulletin for decades. He's giving us his insights, his thoughts, which are just simply not available anywhere else. So if you're listening in, you're going to get some good information here. And let's just get right to it. Next slide, please. Okay, this is what we're going to be talking about today. Just an overview of what we're seeing from the data on I-526 and I-526E filings. We're going to be talking about visa usage, countries that are issuing visas, and throughout that we're going to be talking about the opportunity that exists today for EB5 investors, in particular for those who are in the United States who are able to take advantage of the concurrent adjustment of status provision from the EB5 Reform and Integrity Act. And we're going to get some predictions from Charlie on how long that will be available for prospective EB5 investors. So let's keep moving. Next slide, please. Okay, this right here is a graph showing I-526E and I-526 filings, adjudications, and cases that are pending. And that first grouping of columns, we have fiscal year 2022 and fiscal year 2023. It shows that the EB5 program is definitely back. It shows that we have close to 3,500 new EB5 petitions that have been filed since the EB5 Reform and Integrity Act was passed into law in March of 2022. And it also shows an increase in the adjudication of cases by USCIS. Now, these adjudications are for folks who filed after the new law was enacted and as well as those who filed before. So we still do have clients who have cases pending who filed in 2019, but we have been able to get approvals on those. And we have also been able to get approvals for those who have filed in 2022 and in 2023. And the reason why is because of USCIS processing of EB5 cases has really taken a turn for the better. And I don't know how long it's going to last, but what I can say is that 2 years ago, when I read the priority processing provision in the EB5 and Reform Integrity Act, I kind of scoffed at it. I was saying, oh, this isn't ever going to happen. I'm seeing cases that have been pending for 3 to 4 years. How are they going to be able to prioritize this? What does this actually mean in practice? And I've been surprisingly wrong by USCIS, and sometimes I don't even believe the words that are coming out of my mouth when I say that we have approvals in as quick as 3 to 4 months on these EB5 cases. I mean, 2 years ago I would have said it's a pipe dream. It never would have happened, and yet we consistently see it coming from USCIS for EB5 petitions who are in projects with approved I-956F applications. Those are getting approved much quicker than I would have ever thought. And that will allow the Department of State and USCIS to begin to use these reserve visa numbers, which have been sort of set aside or reserved for use in accordance with the EB5 Reform and Integrity Act. And so that brings me to my first question to Charlie is, we look at this data. We don't have a great breakdown yet of how many have been filed by nationals from a specific country or in specific investment categories, whether it's rural or high unemployment. But when you look at this data, can you give us your thoughts on like potential final action dates throughout, well, let's just say throughout calendar year 2024? What do you anticipate there being in the Visa Bulletin in the next 10 to 12 months?
I think throughout the remainder of the calendar year of 2024, that all of the three reserved categories will remain current. But I think it's also important for people to realize that if they're considering filing in one of the three reserved categories, it's always very important for people to file their petition to accord status as quickly as possible, because you always want to be as close to the front of any line which will develop in the future.
And so for folks who are in the United States on H-1B who have EB2 and EB3 priority dates, they're looking at EB5 as a plan B. They already have a spot in line, in a green card line. And let's just talk about Indian nationals, because that's where a lot of my prospective clients are, that's their nationality, and that's the opportunity for them. They've worked hard in the United States, they've saved up a lot of money, maybe they've purchased a home and the value of that home has gone up, and they're using that new equity to get a home equity line of credit and to help fund EB5. I mean, Charlie, and we do have an entire other Chatting with Charlie series where we can go into depth on this, but maybe just from a high level perspective, if someone has an EB2 or EB3 priority date of, say, 2016 or 17, do you have any just estimation of, and this for an Indian national, of how long it may take for the Visa Bulletin to become current for those individuals?
I think those individuals are going to have an extended wait. Right now, the final action date for the month of March of 2024 for both India E2 and E3 is in calendar year 2012. And I think that those dates are only going to be advancing by 1 to 2 weeks per month for the foreseeable future. The reason being that there's just so much demand and so few numbers available at this time, and probably for coming fiscal years, for India E2 and E3 applicants. So again, being able to file in the employment fifth preference, one of the three reserved categories, provides a unique opportunity to give them basically two chances at a visa going forward.
And so, and that was going to kind of lead to my next question of, it's completely possible and okay to have an EB2, EB3 case where an I-140 is approved and you're waiting for the visa to become current, as well as having an EB5 case too, right? There's no restriction there.
There is no restrictions. And again, so this is kind of the beauty of this new three reserved categories. You can try to get as close to the front of the line that will develop in the future. But again, you will have two chances each month when the final action dates are listed in Chart A of the Visa Bulletin. You can look there and compare your India employment second or third date versus your India reserved priority date.
Right. Right. And I'm telling people that, if they have an EB2, 3, this is an Indian national of maybe 2018 or more recently, you're probably going to be getting your green card faster through EB5 than if you're waiting for that Visa Bulletin to have a current priority date. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I agree with you 100%.
Yeah. I mean, I think it gets a little bit trickier as you go further back at 2014, 2015. Those I think are a little bit, you're starting to get to the question marks. But for a lot of folks, people who are doing EB5 are doing it because they have non-US children, non-US born children who could potentially age out if they aren't able to get that current priority date for EB2 and EB3. And so they are doing this not necessarily for themselves. They're fine to stay here on H-1B and wait their spot in the line for their EB2, EB3, but it's their children that they're worried about. They don't want their children to have to go through the H-1B process. They want to give them all of the opportunities and advantages of having a green card, whether it's going to school, applying for medical school, not having an employer need to sponsor for job purposes, or maybe they want to start their own company. You know, there's a lot more flexibilities that you have in the United States with a green card than on some sort of temporary non-immigrant visa status. And before we move to the next slide, the only thing I want to say here is, you know, those blue lines, adjudication, the 3,253 that we've seen, that's amazing. We want to see that continue to go up. And we obviously want to see the pending cases go down. And not only do we want to see that, but we want to see these the visa numbers actually being used. So let's go to the next slide where we talk a little bit about the projects that are in the EB5 market here. We're not going to spend too much time on this other than for me to say that USCIS has said, and there's a flow chart on their website, which is very clear, that they are not going to approve, they're not going to approve an investor's I-526E until they have approved the I-956F for the project in which the investor put their funds towards. And the reason why, they're not going to waste their time looking at investor cases if the project isn't approvable. They are going to approve the project first, and then they look at the source of funds for each individual investor at the I-526E side. The 2 points that I want to make here, number one is look at that median processing time. You're seeing I-956F approvals in right around a year, which is excellent to see. Again, we didn't know how quickly USCIS would be processing these, but I think we have enough data at this point to show, okay, it's taking around a year or so for USCIS to approve those. That's not too bad. It's actually faster than the old exemplar process, a little bit faster than the old exemplar process. So that's good. And then the other thing that I just wanted to say is we're seeing more and more of these 956Fs being filed. At some point, the demand for these EB5 visas, the number of projects that is looking for EB5 capital, it's going to be larger than the actual number of investors who are able to file. So at some point, you know, there's going to be the market for EB5 money is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. I'm filing new 956F projects on a weekly basis. There's a lot of people who want this money. There's not as many people, I think, who are able to afford it. And so you need to do your research into the projects. Well, if they don't raise all of the EB5 money, how are they going to complete the project? What is their backup plan? And this leads me to just give a brief a shout out. We're doing another webinar next week, which I hope you register for. It is with a registered broker dealer who has been in the EB5 business for many years, and we're going to be talking about EB5 due diligence. How do you select an EB5 project? What considerations do you factor when you're looking at the different things that are on the market? And we're going to talk a little bit more about the I-956Fs and what that means. From my point of view, the I-956F is great because it shows that USCIS has already approved the project and the offering documents comply with EB5, and it gives them the ability to approve the I-526. But that in itself is not enough. You do want to make sure that the project is in a position to be able to actually create the jobs and is in a good position to repay your money when you're able to get the money back. So just a little plug for our webinar next week, which you should be able to register for. And actually, you can submit questions ahead of time through the registration. And although we're not doing question and answers today for this Chatting with Charlie, you should be getting a link sent, which will allow you to ask questions for the next one. And if it's something that is needed quicker, we can try to get to it in the meantime just through email. But please, we always feel like these presentations are better when there's real back and forth with questions from customers or regional centers that we can help answer. So let's keep moving to the next slide. Okay, this slide is great because it shows visa usage in fiscal year 2024 to date. It actually doesn't include the January visa issuance statistics, which Charlie, you mentioned earlier that the Department of State just put up. Can you give us a breakdown of what that last month's, the January 2024 visa issuance numbers show?
Yes, for China in January, 508 numbers were used in the unreserved categories versus only 143 for December. In India, 70 numbers were used versus 132 for the month of December. And for January for Vietnam, 76 were used versus 144 for the month of December. So while India and Vietnam have dropped in number use for January, there has been basically an explosion in number use for China unreserved applicants, which is very, very encouraging.
That's great to hear. And so the blue is actually, you know what? I think we have a typo here. The blue is fiscal year 2023. The orange is fiscal year 2024. And so we would see an orange line for January, um, which I think it was going to be right around 600 or so, at least. And
At
so that's
least.
significantly more than what it was last year. Um, and we're seeing this great increase of visa use, which is excellent, which is what we need to see to reduce the backlog. In particular for China, which has existed for what, 7, 8 years at this point.
Yeah.
And there are over 14,000 visa numbers that are available this fiscal year to the unreserved EB5 category. And unfortunately, it doesn't seem like, I mean, I guess we're trending in the right direction, but they're not. They haven't even issued a quarter of that 14,000, right? Right, Charlie? I mean, we're not even a quarter of the way through the use.
Right.
Yeah. Do
Right.
you?
And this is, we have a unique opportunity this year in the unreserved category because of the 14,000 ish limit you mentioned. This is a unique opportunity to work off a lot of the backlog and pending cases which are out there for the unreserved categories. And it would be somewhat unconscionable if large amounts of numbers, unreserved numbers, were left on the table with that 14,000 ish limit. So hopefully, number use will continue to increase in the coming months.
And we have seen an uptick in the number of interviews that are being scheduled at the U.S. consulate in Guangzhou over the past couple of weeks. So let's just hope this trend continues during the springtime. The other thing which is very new and great to see is that we have heard reports of some adjustment of status applications for the reserved EB5 categories. So in this year, the limit is 8,136. It's very much unlikely that we're going to get to that level. We may not even get halfway through that level or even a quarter of the way, but it is good to see that at least some of these numbers are being used this fiscal year. And if you want to hear about why it's so important that these numbers are used now and not waiting until next year and things like that, I ask that you go back into YouTube and look at some of our prior Chatting with Charlie EB5 investor outlooks. But maybe, Charlie, you can give us just a 10,000 view or 10,000 foot view of why it's so important that these reserve visa numbers are being used now. I think that we might be having some freezing or technical stuff there, but the reason why is that they have carryover. They carry over if they don't get used. And after 2 years of non-use, they go to the unreserved visa category. And if they don't get used, there's the possibility, more likelihood of future backlogs in the future in these reserved visa categories. So the more use that we can do in fiscal year 2024, the better. All right, let's go to the next slide. Okay, this gets to country posts, and again, it does not consider the January visa allocation. Um, Charlie, what is so peculiar about Vietnam here?
The Vietnam is very interesting because they have already issued in the unreserved category numbers in excess of their quote per country limit, uh, which is fine, but typically that you would expect that the China number use and India number use would be high as well before the Vietnam would reach these levels where they're using far more than their per country limit. So it is very, somewhat interesting to me that although Vietnam has exceeded their per country limit, that no final action date has been imposed at this point. Good for Vietnam, but it is leading to questions why why the China and India final action dates are not moving at a greater pace in order to allow higher numbers to be used.
When we were prepping for this, though, you mentioned that when you were in control of the Visa Bulletin, there were times where if there were some um, maybe some capacity issues at a consulate, that you would have allowed for greater number use in other countries in order to maximize the overall use
Correct.
of
Several
EB5, right?
years Yes, several years ago, there were unreserved final action dates for both Vietnam and India, and they were imposed at a time when number use was high. But when it became apparent that Guangzhou was not going to be able to use all the available China numbers, I let those numbers fall for use by India and Vietnam applicants, and that allowed those two categories to return to current status. So again, one of the reasons why state may be allowing Vietnam to already use more numbers than the normal per country limit is they do not expect demand from China and India to be able to use all the otherwise unused numbers.
And the numbers that we saw on the slide before sort of lead to that conclusion if they were to say the same. Hopefully, we're going to see some better processing and increased number use, but that would be consistent with the numbers that we've seen for the first few months of fiscal year 2024.
Right. And again, but it is, like I said, it is somewhat surprising that neither the China or India unreserved final action dates are not advancing it at a faster pace to allow potential applicants to utilize numbers. Uh, so
Right. Right.
that is my one question.
Okay. I think that's very fair. All right, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so this is the form EB5 filing increases that's happening on April 1st. And you can see the crazy increases in particular for that last row, which is the initial application for EB5 investors, the I-526 or the I-526E, which is for a regional center investor. It's going up nearly $8,000. And because of that, people are spurred into action. They want to get the same immigration benefit. They don't want to spend $8,000 more. If they know that EB5 is what they want to do, well, you get your spot in the queue by establishing a priority date. You establish the priority date by filing the case, and you need to do the investment into the project in order to make the I-526E application. So it's investment, then filing. And what's great about this concurrent adjustment of status application is that you can get the EAD and the advanced parole in as quick as 3 to 4 months after filing the EB5 case. And it actually, there's no impact whatsoever on the issuance or validity of an EAD or advanced parole if you say you invest the full 800K or you invest 400K and you show that you're actively in the process of investing. And so in terms of timing, you may not have all of the funds that are liquid by April 1st, and that's okay. We can still prepare and submit your case beforehand and show that you are still meeting the EB5 regulations of being actively in the process of investing. Now, there are some sort of best practices and potential risks involved, which you should, reach out to an immigration attorney. I'm happy to talk to you about that on an individual basis. And it really can depend on the project if they accept a partial investment and sort of the terms for the remainder of the balance of the investment. But it is something that we're seeing people taking advantage of, not only to reduce the to reduce the costs, but also to get their spot in line with the I-526E priority date. And so if EB5 is something that you are interested in doing, I really would recommend you speaking with an immigration attorney this week or next, because it does take a little bit of time to prepare a case in order to get it approvable. And there's source of funds analysis that needs to get done. There are documents that may need to be translated. There are a whole host of, personalized documents, birth certificates, marriage certificates, everything like that all needs to get in order to file the adjustment of status application. And it can take a couple of weeks to get that prepared. And so if you're trying to do EB5 before April 1st, we are still accepting cases at WR Immigration with a commitment to file before that filing fee increase goes up. But the sooner you sign up, the better. It'll help us put together a better case for you and your family's behalf. So it is something that we are seeing a huge increase on. Like Charlie mentioned before, we do foresee it to remain current in the reserved visa categories for the foreseeable future, for at least the next 6-8 months or so, 10 months. And that's because that visa limit is so big compared to the number of cases that USCIS has approved to date and of getting ready for actual visa use. But that's not going to last forever. And so if you are thinking about doing EB5 and you have that EB2, EB3 priority date, and you're concerned about age outs for children, please reach out. And we would be happy to discuss how we can assist and how we can secure a green card for your entire family. So with that, I think we're going to draw to an end. I don't think we have any more slides. But Finn, if you go to that last slide, can you just put my contact information out there? If you guys have questions, oh yeah, we have all these really cool QR codes. You can scan those as well. But if you just want to send me an email, you could do that. We're trying to be as responsive as possible. We understand timing is tight. But we do want to help, and we would be more than pleased to do so. So, Charlie, thank you so much for your insights, and I look forward to speaking with you again next month.
It's been a pleasure.
All right. Thank you all.